So security under the pass.
Yeah. It is different. I can meet you in person. Likewise. I agree.
Just so everyone is aware, Wendy has us now turned on for live streaming. So if you're going to, gossip about my hair, it will be broadcast. So. The mics pick up everything. So you want to have a sidebar and gossip, it's likely to get broadcast. Welcome to Big Brother.
We have some room to stretch out a little bit, guys, want a little bit more space in between. I think that we're expecting 3 more people.
Yeah. Posted on the
Right. That's good to see. I'm next, I guess. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm going. Yeah. Russ, I really do. How are you? It's fine. Oh, yeah. I know, I see that. Don't worry about it. Everybody's gonna think that's fine. But I was. Yeah.
How's it going? I'm Wendy.
I was thinking so, but then I didn't. Okay. Okay, these are the people I'm not happy. Okay, all right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Well, I know that it's police. Let's see. And they're still privately held, say, oh, you can't find a state. Friends of mine, that's been in Virginia. Saw they had sheets down there. When they started this, that was a dairy. Yeah, we have one at the same. Our magisterial district. So, a couple of years ago, in Washington, they were marking for the school, very nice. One skip the neighborhood. And then in the morning. Good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order and then we're streaming this.
Yes.
So everyone has to be streaming this now. So.
Sure.
I'm the chair, Kenneth Lawrence. As our vice chair, Joe Pants is here. Happy Christmas. Jesse Daniel.
Present.
Lisa Deely, I don't believe it's present.
We're waiting.
We're ready for her. Okay, Representative Diamond. Here. Bruce Erb, here. Christina Iacono. James Smith, here. Mayor Ursula, here. Daniel Logan, here. Here. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Time to start the party.
We got an active agenda.
Okay, couple of quick admin things, out of the way. The meeting's being recorded and live streamed via YouTube, so you need to speak up. Unless you don't want to be heard. We have a sign-in sheet that is how Wendy keeps attendance, so if you can just check that your information is correct and initial next to it, that would be good. We're going to break for lunch at noon for 1 hour, and the live stream will end for that hour. Nobody wants to watch us eat sandwiches, I don't believe. We've had a few members resign. At the end of 2021, Fred Sembeck, who was represented Senate leadership, retired from the Senate and has and part of the decision with that was that he would not continue with this board. He has not been replaced yet. Andrew Ziffy retired. Amy Cozy retired. Both of those, I believe, got new jobs that would prevent them from being on this board. And then Jean DiGirolamo resigned. I'm not really sure what prompted that, although I know he retired from the legislature a couple of years ago, so maybe he's just finishing, dragging out his retirement like some of us do. So, but those 3 seats are empty, and the governor's office has been notified that those 3 appointments should be filled. We've not gotten names back for that yet. So that's where we stand. We still have a lovely crew to work with. Lots of talent and ideas and abilities and hardly a uniform lot of thinking. So I think we can still manage to do it, until those positions are filled. I know. Get started here. Question is, Glenn, do you think we need to discuss the process of the board for the live stream?
Walk in here, the person who's speaking, that there's a sofa back there, okay?
I guess it's. The process in terms of.
Just how we operate.
Okay, okay, sure. Step out. So basically what normally, and this is a little bit different, but it's not a regular advisory committee. This being advisory board, it's more of a public function. But when we draft reports and you all get a chance to review them and make your recommendations, and we get that back and forth, then we publish, like as you see these, these nicely bound reports. Those go over to, they're released to the public, but essentially our audience is the legislature. So they then can look at it, gives them the information that we think they need, and our goal is always that somebody can pick up the report and read through it and either know something about the topic they didn't know before, or say, oh, I need to learn more about this. So it can either give them the information they want and tell them what they don't know enough about. And then it is in the hands of the legislature to do what they want to do with the recommendations. If there's draft legislation in there, it's not fast track, but it gives them a starting point to then work from and start drafting from that point moving forward. So, it's basically to inform the legislature and give them some ideas, and then somebody over there will pick it up and say, oh, this is a great idea, we can work with this. And then they'll get back in touch with us and our staff. And in this case, this body continues. Usually they end with the published the report. But since this keeps going, then in a way we can come back to you and say, oh, we have questions about why this is drafted this way, that way somebody wants to work on it, they want to advance some legislation. What did you really mean if there are clarifications and things like that? So there can be some back and forth. But basically, these aren't final decisions of the legislature. This is independent information so that they can then make final decisions on it. They would choose to do so.
Okay, yes. So with that goal in mind and that expectation of what we're going to attempt to produce today, I want to get started on the whole concept of mail-in ballots. At our last meeting, we chose to delay discussion on the mail-in ballots because we knew there was a decision relatively soon from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on the constitutionality of mail-in ballots. And so we wanted to wait to see what that decision would be. And that decision came down last month. And the court found that the statute that included mail-in ballots was constitutional. But, and I think everybody could agree that being constitutional does not mean that it's perfect. We have seen in the first couple of elections where mail-in ballots have been used, that there are some gaps in the statute, there are some areas of ambiguity in the statute that have helped contribute to some confusion over how mail-in ballots are used, how they function. We have a couple of different perspectives on what has happened with the mail-in ballots when things haven't gone right. And one of those perspectives is if every letter of the law has not been followed, it's an illegal vote. And in a technical English reading of the definitions of those words, if it doesn't comply with the law, then it's illegal. But we also have the concept of what was the intent, and was it meant to be illegal and fraudulent? And if you don't have the fraudulent intent, then it's more breaking the spirit of the law than the rule of the law, which would say it's legal or it's not legal. So I think one of the things we need to do is look at the statute and figure out the ways that we can make it clearer so that those rule of law violations, which I don't think can ever be eliminated, but can be reduced. And then on the other side, we need to look at those opportunities that the statute presents where nefarious persons could do nefarious things, and figure out how to manage those security issues so that people's votes are protected when they vote. So I think our goal is to try to clean that statute up. My personal opinion is it is unfair to the citizens of Pennsylvania to let a flawed statute sit out there and continue to cause confusion and innocent or fraudulent illegal mistakes if we have the ability to go back, revisit it, and figure out how to clean it up. And I know there are some people who would advocate just repeal it and start over. Clean slates are good sometimes. Given the way this has been unfolding in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of starting from scratch with a whole new set of rules, I think would just aggravate the confusion. People understand sort of what Act 77 is doing now, even though they may have some confusion about the various aspects of it. But I think with the proper suggested amendments that address both sides of the illegality question, we can clean up a statute that they're kind of familiar with now in a way that would allow voters to use that constitutionally approved method of voting in a way that helps dispel all of these doubts that have been floating out among the populace about what is mail-in vote. So having said all of that, I think our mission is to look at Act 77 and look at those, starting with what appear to be the big question marks, and go through them and talk here amongst ourselves details of what we think potential amendments, potential recommendations should look like, my goal coming out of this meeting is we come down to a list of fixes that we think will help. And then as staff, we would take back draft legislation, draft amendments that would accomplish those goals. And then have us plan like 1 hour Zoom relatively soon after this meeting where we could look it over and vote yay or nay, send it to the General Assembly. We are probably not going to be able to accomplish anything before the election this fall. I mean, we will, but given the amount of time the General Assembly will be in between now and November, it'd be hard pressed for them to pass anything. But if we can have it done, if we can have it in front of them come January, when they come back and can do work again, we can have a slate of amendments that they can take and clean up as best we can at 77 and see what it does next front, how it works next primary. So that's our perspective, maybe mine, because I get to tell those guys what to do. But the point being, I think that's where we're going. I think that's what we need to do. Anybody have any comment on that?
I'd just say, speak up when you're talking, because we did hear from somebody out there watching the live stream that it's a little bit hard to hear. So.
I would simply weigh in that even having something in place before the next primary might be very, very, very obvious. If you know how that legislation works.
Yes. Well, you know, if I weren't an optimist, I would have left here a long time.
Too.
But everybody okay with that game plan? Everybody think that's gonna work for us? This is why I didn't want to be mail-in ballots at our last meeting, because I didn't feel we had enough time.
Ron, may I ask maybe a procedural? As we work towards the document that we're all over to go across the street, I think in an ideal world, this group could reach consensus on every issue. That would be the ideal achievement. But I suspect there might be a couple of issues on which there might be 2 or maybe even 3 or 4 schools of thought. When it comes time to reach a final conclusion on various issues, will a majority vote, or will a majority of the board determine the position? Or will there be an allowance, let's say, and I think I brought this up last time, will there be an allowance for the majority's point of view with perhaps a paragraph or so indicating what the minority's point of view is?
We do that all the time. Yes, absolutely. Because we don't do simple majorities. We rarely raise hands and count. We tend to work off of the sense of the board. And so if we got, people are sitting and nodding, and enough people are sitting and nodding, and I'll say, okay, looks like everybody's nodding and agreeing. Anybody object? And reiterate it and move on. But we also will say this is the suggestion that the most of the group agrees upon, but there are some other suggestions that have been made, and here's the information on those other suggestions, because ultimately when it goes across the street, anything can happen, and anybody can pick up any 1 to none of the proposals and run with them. So it happens, but the likelihood is not great that anybody is going to take everything we send them and make a package out of it and run it, because they have different perspectives. So for us to be able to recognize those other perspectives. And maybe when we write about those other perspectives, talk about how they mesh with the preferred or the first priority response, gives them more to build on and to try to make it still more of an integrated model, that you don't have random things out here, there, and the other. So yeah, no, you definitely do that. All right, anybody have any other thoughts they want to share? All right, Grant over there in the corner has done a lot of the research on the mail-in ballot, so I may, throw a tennis ball at him or something as we get to things. But I think I'm looking through my own. Did I do it? Anyway. Yeah, let's talk about the time to request mail-in ballots, because that's something we've talked about before in the work groups, with how much time it takes to having people coming into the election offices requesting mail-in ballots, completing them there and turning them back in while you're trying to prepare for the full in-person election. And so my understanding is it's a stress on the personnel, and the turnaround time that currently exists, which is about 7 days, is really, really tight to get an application to a person completes it, and they get it back to the courthouse if they don't bring it in person, if they try to mail it. So one of the things we have seen, and one of the things that was discussed earlier in the work groups, was moving that deadline back to 15 days before the election day, so that if you wanted to do a mail-in ballot, you have, and I phrase it, 50 days before or something like that, that you can request, that you have all of that time from the beginning 50 days up to 15 days before election day to request your mail-in ballot. And then the rest of that time, the elections office is not being forced to deal with those while they're trying to get ready for everything else, because they're doing trainings during those weeks. They're doing a lot of extra things during that last week leading up the election that so we stretched out so it's not so crammed into such a short time frame. And I mean, we would not disturb the language that said if you didn't get a mail-in ballot and an emergency came up and you needed one after the deadline, that you could still get one. I mean, that process would still be in place. And part of it, I think, would be educating people, and we certainly spend enough advertising money on TV about elections in general. I've seen a lot of ads on a number of different topics that paid for with Pennsylvania tax dollars. So educating people about how to vote properly seems to me to be a pretty valid use of Pennsylvania taxpayer dollars, that to remind people, if you want a mail-in ballot, tomorrow's the deadline, today's the deadline, next week is the deadline, so that that message gets out there that people can do that. So that is the first.
Ron, if I can.
Yeah.
I'd actually like to take it back further than that.
Yeah,
I'm just reading the second point here, provision allowing the voter to request to be placed on a permanent mail-in voting list, ensuring they will automatically receive a mail-in ballot for future elections. There is no permanent
right,
mail-in list, it's an annual list, and even after 2 years of this, I'll still have voters who say, I applied to be on the permanent list.
Mhm.
No, it's an annual, and if you don't do it, and people still expecting that they're automatically gonna receive them, so. I'd like to see that cleared up, and it should not be a permanent list.
no,
But people are still confused about that, because we refer to it as a permanent list, it's not a permanent list, it's an annual.
again, and I think in that situation, you have confusing statutory language that misleads people. That, my impression from prior discussions with this group, that, there are some strong feelings against having permanent mailing lists, that, people have constituents and voters in the area who don't want their personal information stored permanently anywhere. So one of the suggestions we looked at and talked about is to eliminate the permanent mailing list, but for those people who are traditionally absentee ballot people, which is what they had before, that if you receive an absentee ballot because of disability or something like that, that your doctor could provide information and you could be on that particular mailing list where you could receive your absentee ballot automatically because you had an ongoing medical condition that justified being on a permanent absentee ballot list. So what we've been thinking is that list serves a legitimate purpose for people who have a very hard time getting to the ballot place.
That's right.
But for people in general who want a mail-in ballot, that it shouldn't exist at all. You want to vote, you ask for it each time. Because what we've seen in some other states that we were looking at, and Brand did a piece on how all mail-in states have been working for us, that they automatically send a ballot every election to every registered voter. Now, this group or various members of you have spoken in the past about how that seemed to be an idea that could promote fraudulent returns. Where I think Russ, you might have mentioned that.
I believe the underlying language for me there is that our voter rolls are too messy for that to be kind of a very narrow system, and so if we could sometime at some point get our voter rolls like up to the correct and without these long delays, then that might be something that's more worthwhile talking about. Then I did have a question, Chair. You said there, in your opinion, there shouldn't be a permanent list. Was that accurate in what I heard?
Right, that I don't think you should just.
Could I ask you why? Because that comes as a bit of a surprise.
I think for the reasons that you said, the voter rolls and people move, and they go, so I think it's fine for someone to apply at the beginning of the year that I want to receive a mail-in ballot, so.
So you're okay with the annual, but you
Not
got
a permanent.
perpetual.
Yes.
There were a lot of reasons, like moving, like treatings, like college students who change their address every few years, or young people who don't go to college and follow their jobs and their careers wherever, that it is not easy to keep current. So that was one of the things that we also wanted to talk about, was dealing with that permanent maintenance. And like I said, from our perspective, it was, you know, eliminating it for your basic mail-in ballot, but retaining it for those special circumstances under the absentee ballot rules, and really distinguishing that. And you know, finding whoever came up with the phrase permanent mail-in list and slap their name with a ruler, because semantics, you have to use the right words.
Let me just back up. The gist of what you're saying here is that there is a distinct difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting, the traditional absentee voting. And I think I don't know if anybody here would realize this, but the original intention when we first started talking about Act 77 in the state government committee was we were also going to eliminate the absentee system and merge those two systems into one. And just for this reason, I'm glad we never pursued that. Actually, we did move a bill for that out of state government, but it never went about for it. But I'm glad we never separated the two systems, and we allowed them to do these things.
Yeah, no, I think it's important.
Pardon, may I follow up on Diana's point?
Absolutely.
As it relates to both the absentee ballot, I'd like to kind of quickly start on election day and work backwards. Sure. Having been on our board of elections since 2004 in our county, I do know that on election day, if an emergency arises for a voter, they have the ability to go to the court is in session all day, and secure an emergency ballot. Once a judge hears the reasons for the request, and if the judge deems it appropriate, legal, the judge grants the emergency ballot. Then coming to the absentee ballot, of course, my recollection is that purposes for an absentee ballot are either illness or absence from your county or voting district. So I hope I'm hearing you say that specifically on this set of paragraphs under the title "Time to Request a Ballot," that all of this language is specific to a mail-in ballot. I'm glad Mr. Diamond brought up the absentees. What you're proposing for us to consider, not related to absentee ballots, since, for example, you may get ill a week before the election. Oh my goodness, I can't go vote. I've got to get an absentee ballot. So don't we understand, number one, that this is specific to mail-in ballots only. In looking this over, I don't think the issue of absentees is addressed at all. But what's in place, assuming would be proposed to remain in place. With that being said, then, is it perhaps, and this is very technical and very minor, but would it be more appropriate under the heading "Time to Request a Ballot"? Should that be revised to say "Time to Request a mail"? Thank you.
That's what that's what we meant. You know, it's time to request a mail-in ballot.
Thank you very much.
Now, there are places parties will remain anonymous, where when you're drafting a large piece of legislation, a little casualness comes in and groups occur unintentionally, groupings occur, so that you have absentee and mail-in kind of grouped together with some things. And that's one of the things that I would like to see as we draft anything, is to really distinguish those two pathways to vote, the absentee and the mail-in, so you don't have the confusion and the overlap that can sometimes happen. And part of it is trying to amend 1937 that was written in the age of chivalry, I guess. Yeah.
Here we go back to Dan's points.
Mhm.
Prior to Act 77, one of the county groups to clarify this story was not the absentee deadline. The roughly 2 weeks before the election. it got moved by accidents. So why would we not also include absentee deadline moving back as well as the mail-in? I believe that's where the original absentee ballot was, and it got moved with accidents, so why not move it back with moving back in tandem? I just don't understand why the.
Any negative. to
What's
do-
that?
I don't see any negative to doing that, because again, the person who's, I mean, if you have an emergency situation, you have the remedy
Right,
for the emergency situation. If you're, for the most part, if you're doing an absentee ballot, you know well in advance that you're gonna need an absentee ballot. You know, you're studying out of the state, you have major surgery scheduled that month, whatever, that you have time. There's no window where you can't get an opportunity to vote one way or another in that schedule. So I don't think it is really makes a difference.
because from an
keep it
administrative
separately.
point, from the county standpoint, I would think that if you're not gonna move them back together in tandem, now the counties are dealing with 3 different elections rather than 2 different.
Yes, no, that's a good
Well,
point.
and to that point, I'd say, that I would argue that we are dealing with 3 different elections currently. To the chairman, yeah, that's four. But back to the chairman, moving the deadlines back, I agree, I mean, I believe it was 14 or 15 days.
Yeah.
Last night. But again, the one part that we've not discussed here yet involves the early in-person voting through the mail-in ballot process. That is I would say, probably the most challenging of all of this, because that's the new way to vote. The new way to vote on top of everything else. So even if we didn't look at changing the deadlines, which I'm in favor of moving them back, having that in-person voting, what used to happen by absentee ballot occasionally, has now gone up, I would say, 50-fold in a small county like mine. So where we used to have maybe 20 people vote in person by absentee ballot, because they weren't going to be in the district on election day, we now have them coming in, applying for their mail-in ballot as they can, voting in person as they can, and that number is now in the hundreds, well in the hundreds. But it's right in that crunch time when we're trying to get ready, training our poll workers, getting everything ready for the in-person vote. There's a lot of logistics that have to happen to get all of those precincts ready, let alone when you have, that last minute, oh, our precinct got COVID and we got to find a new building, or something else comes up. That last minute finding poll workers that dropped out suddenly. Or now I need an inspector, or I need a judge, or whatever it could be. Doing that on top of, and this is with a staff of 2 people, by the way, doing all of that on top of in person is almost impossible. And they do it well, but it's quite the burden. So, being able to move that back and having that deadline, let's say 2 weeks prior versus a week prior, makes all the difference in the world now, because now I've got the last 2 weeks to focus on nothing but emergency ballots and my in-person polls, which I've got to prepare.
Well, and the reality is too, if you wait until a week before. You're just cutting it too close. I mean, it's disenfranchising people, let them think that they can wait a week before.
Clearly, you're never mailed it.
Yeah.
Without throwing the postal service under the bus.
Right.
We've all experienced, receiving a bill in the mail that's, I get them all the time. Well, it was due last week and I just got it.
Similar to politics. I don't like mine. He's great.
That's the application was, I think it was on that. I mean, I thought for a second it might have been like the second part, but from the Act 77, that bit of language was still in there. I mean, that said, I agree that it's the mail-in piece in particular, that's the one for hundreds of thousands of cast extended that has been that some amount of time. if I've got, I'll drop this in there, maybe I'll raise it this way, especially with county clerks, don't jump on me, but, you know, when you're in CCAP's position, there are a couple dozen states that have, vote by no request deadlines, and they're 7 days for the election or earlier. And then there are a dozen and a half that have request deadlines that are 10 or 11 days, before the election. And then there's 5 or 6 that have request deadlines that are farther back than 10 or 11 days. They're 15 days, 14, 15 days. There's a couple states even having 21, 23. So if we were to move 15 days prior, that would put us in that last group of 5 or 6 days. Now, I guess I'd say this, I think if we were designing the whole thing from scratch, there's all sorts of things we're doing different, but we're not designing the whole thing from scratch. And the counties and the voters are burdened by the current deadline. So I anticipate that the consensus of the group is going to be to go with the 14 or 15 days back. But if that's where we go, I would just suggest for the purpose of the report that 11 days probably would put us more in the median of states out there, and that if at all possible, I mean, that'd be my personal preference, but I do understand why the counties very much wanted to go farther back from that. And also absolutely stipulate that the voters are also being disenfranchised with the current deadlines, right? And the return deadline, you know, is not on the table right now. It's just the request is. So I would just note that about it. If the consensus is in the back that 11 days would put us more than the median of states out there, but these are not unique circumstances. We're talking about conditions, so I understand why that most of them are probably that far from that.
I would agree that 11 days would probably put us more in sync with the majority of states that have non-voting. And also, it would get people that just registered for 15 days with their registration time to, you know, figure out whether they're going to have to vote by mail.
I actually like the 11 to 12 day as well, because I think if you look at that the 2 weeks before election, when you're really working to recruit poll workers, when you're looking at people that might have dropped and not trying to get new poll workers in, we're shuffling poll workers all across town. And those poll workers might be living in one end of the county and working at another end of the county on election day. They need a way to vote. Now, of course, they could go and use the emergency ballot, but that requires them to spend a day at the county getting all of that done. Maybe they don't have the time to take off work, or they don't work to serve hours on that. So making sure that that deadline is short enough that they can get a ballot, I think would be, and also maybe if we had voting centers where they could go in and do that early voting, like they do that counter on, whether it's at the county council room or, I'm sorry, the county voting office, or if it's a satellite office, being able to use that secondary weekend, 14 days before, would actually kind of really help to get out people to vote and make sure the poll workers are lined up and create the deadlines that we need to. Okay, so I think an 11 or 12 day would be preferable to the.
Just keep in mind, a couple of you touched on this, is that we don't do any of these things in a vacuum. And to say, okay, if consensus of the advisor tell the general assembly, the consensus of the advisor was 11 or 12 days, there's going to have to be something else. So as I'm looking at this, it's the counties that want more time, and that's why we, in the general assembly, have advocated to go back to the 15 days and the 30 days of administration is different. But then maybe the counties might want to get into this. Now we're in negotiations. Well, the counties didn't have to deal with that in person voting with. Well, maybe they can live with it, even over 12 days. So we start fanning out because none of this exists. This is a holistic system, and no single piece of it exists.
Yeah, and just to Russ's point, that's not why CCAP was asking for 21 days for pre-canvassing, hoping to get 7.
Right. Right.
Well, for what it's worth, Pennsylvania generally doesn't care what other states are doing if it doesn't.
It's important we do what's right for Pennsylvania, and particularly, I mean, we look at, it's not the population, but the numbers of counties, chiefly rural, and those problems that Joe talks about are probably commonplace in half or more of the counties. I mean, we're a fifth-class county, a lot bigger. We were able to do some things that we could do the early voting much easier by moving our election and doing a lot of things, but it still isn't ideal, and not every county has that opportunity or the resources to do that. We have to like look at the broader piece and how we're affecting 67 different elections. And for that reason, I favor the 15 days, 14, whatever, in that.
I have a question, maybe more operational. So if the voter registration applications are coming at the 15-day mark, and there's always a surge, and the county's got to scramble to get through all those. Would it not just complicated, add on to have all those deadlines on the same day, especially when this will happen less and less, but for someone who submits a paper copy mail-in application to an office, and then a voter registration application comes second, but the voter reg application process second, just because the papers are in the office. That's again, that's going to happen less and less because online the forms are merged, and as we all know, I guess on paper now they're merged. But that's still going to be a little bit of a paper complication for some of the time. The longer both the online and the paper forms are merged, and the less and less will have that, but you'll still have that sort of application all in one day. And so that would it be helpful then to have at least 1 day break? I mean, for voter reg, I'm 15 days out, mail-in on 14 days, just to segment a little bit. But this is definitely a question for you guys in these offices on a regular basis.
Yes. You also have somebody who assumes they're registered, applies for a million ballot, and to discover they're not registered. Then they don't have as much time then to register.
I think one of the things you have to take into consider there too is with the proliferation of electronic voter registration, which has to get shunted to the Department of State and then back to the county. And the county has to, or is at least obligated to potentially do some verification for the identification of the voter. I don't know that you can have even 1 day, and Jonathan's not here. Jonathan's not here, right? Yeah, Jonathan, Deputy Secretary, is not here today, but I don't know what that lag time is between when the voter hits, I want to be a registered voter, to the time when they're officially considered a registered voter, between all the communications with state and county verification, if needed, and then back to the Department of State and the sources. So I'm not sure that even a 1 day thing is enough there. Because we certainly don't want to send out a mail-in ballot to someone who registered to vote, but is not qualified. So.
Well, and just running through my brain here. Maybe the response to the person who comes in and wants to register very close to the deadline and then wants to do a mail-in ballot is to just tell them up front, this late in the game, you have to show up in person the first time so that you don't run into that kind of overlapping mailing problem. And I say with the person who thinks they're registered, applies for the mailing and finds out they're not, they can register right away, but they would have to then show up on election day to vote in person because there was not time to get the mail-in ballot. And again, that's an educational thing that when you say this is the registration deadline, and if you are planning on doing a mail-in ballot, you need to get your registration in and your request in days before that deadline, because otherwise you have Because I'm thinking, well, how do you deal with that? I mean, do you then move registration deadline back to 1 days? And leave the mail-in ballot 14 days, so you have a week in there to figure out if you're validly registered, and then you can get your mail-in ballot. I mean, you're starting to drag the process out a great deal of time. So to me, the simplest answer, and we're not talking a mail-in ballot, and we're not talking an absentee ballot where there's a reason that the person is not going to be able to be at the polling place. They just, for whatever reason, it's more convenient to do the mailing, is if they register on the last day and want a mail-in ballot, you just have to say, sorry, can't do that. You're going to have to vote in person because there's not enough time to turn that around. And I imagine there are some people who would not go in person and would just skip it. But I mean, how much are you going to contort the schedule to deal with people who wait to the last minute?
That seems logical to me, and it seems like, well, that's a reasonable thing to do. But I can only imagine the lawsuits that will happen, because that first time voter who shows up to vote now has to show ID. Whereas the first time voter by mail does not have to physically show any kind of formal ID. There will be lawsuits like that. And I think one of the great qualities of a decent legislator is imagining what will happen down the line.
See, and as just an advisor, council person, I'm saying, well, this is the way to fix it. You deal with the other issues.
This is not a new problem. This is, I mean, I can think back to many phone calls since I've been commissioner, pre-Act 77, of people calling and wanting to see if they were even registered because they wanted to vote in that election and find out past the deadline that they're not registered. So it's not a new problem. It's just, and you're never going to solve all of those issues. I mean, I think the society today does a much better job of publishing and publicizing today's the last day to register to vote. I hear that much more today than I did 15 years ago. And so I think we've come a long way to get to a better place, educate people. But unfortunately, not everybody's always going to do that message.
Well, and that's part of the thing too, is, you know, do you go for perfect, or do you go for what works best for the majority?
Speaking on that, the new voter registration forms that are both online and on print, Lisa, have you had issues with them as far as, I mean, the potential for confusion with voters that are signing up to register to vote and requesting? Yeah.
Letting them believe that they can do those things at the same time. So if the system is not, if the system changes and does not allow them to do that, then the form needs to change, because you are giving people a false sense of hope that they are able to both register and apply for a mail-in ballot at the same time.
I would really, if there's any way that that can be changed like that, I think that
I mean, I would like to see it, I would like to see it stay that way in the 11 days, if you could
Right.
do it that way. But if you're gonna change the days where you can't get a mail-in ballot and register at the same time, then the form's gonna.
And that's only the part of the state
Yes.
website.
It's the new form. It was recently revised. I think it came out about a month ago. So it's a new there's a new checkbox at the bottom of
Where it allows, you are allowing the voter to do those things that.
But now, right now, the deadline to register is 15. And the deadline for a mail-in ballot is 7.
Correct.
So how are they doing it now, since you have 2 separate dates there?
Well, they just changed it, so
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see how they implement that as we approach November.
it's flawed like everything else.
It's creating a lot of learning.
There's a lot of errors.
Well, I think you're gonna create a lot of irate voters when we get to that last, I mean, did the department interface with the counties at all prior to developing the.
They interface, they showed it.
Glad we have that on our hands.
By feedback. And then they showed it to us. And
And then they put it online.
So.
I can't speak for any of the other 66 counties that wasn't requested on that.
Mine either.
Yeah, I mean, part of the argument was that the online registration form already set up that way, but I guess to the issue that the folks are raising right now, that voter confusion. You won't run into that with the online form. After that, the voter registration, that paper form, that's when the voter might.
We just want them to implement it now. So
Still be 45. When the, I mean, most of you point about it does take, when someone registers, when they submit an application, it's not processed that right away. It does, but I'm not, it does happen pretty quick. Some folks are able to do this, like go to the counter.
Well, yeah, if we are, that's what we use the source system, where we can verify, their ID.
Well, it can't happen quickly if voter checks the box that says I do not have a driver's license. Or I do not have a social security number, but I affirm that I am a citizen. The county is on the hook then to figure out if that's verified. So even when you have a very small subset of voters that are doing that, you need to allow for that time in the overall plan for those voters to not be disenfranchised by the fact that, hey, you told me I could apply for these things at the same time. And now you're denying me more lawsuits. Don't want lawsuits.
Yeah, I would say that our voter registrar, I mean, it's a day or two or three turnaround, depending on the workload at that given moment.
Right.
I know it's for priority. That's number one priority outside of helping get the ballots ready and helping our elections ready. And that's why she's the voter registrar.
But there is a back of line.
It could be.
Whatever it is.
For that subset of voters who don't do the last purpose of their progress. I mean, if the voter registration deadline is 15 days back, and then in the mail, absentee 7 days, but then mail in back to 11, is that between that 15 and 11 days, would that be enough time for most counties to address that subsection of voters that have that ID box? It would help with that more election.
I guess it would depend on staffing, and I think the new shore system, it would probably be easier, at least do you, I don't know, be able to.
I was going to say, all this, we can speak about what we know now, but we're going to get a new voter registration system, and it would really be unfair for me to say whether we can do it or not.
Right.
But with what we use now, this would work. I mean, obviously, the voter registrations that are coming in online are quicker, and the paper, would take longer, as it always does. But I don't want to speak about the new source system because we haven't.
I'm assuming it's done, that's.
Never assume. But
The implementation of that, we're out from that.
Yes.
We're only the phase of this.
Yes.
And I think it's
2023.
2023, but that'll be forward.
Right.
That's about
But
8
that's
months
about-
from now.
What's that?
That's about 8 months from now.
Yeah, but it's a general list.
But that's about when these recommendations that we
Right.
make will be looked at. So we're essentially making recommendations now for what we'll be working on a new system that we haven't seen and worked with. So.
We should perhaps maybe reach those 15, because if you're going to be changing other parts of the team, you would want to lengthen the amount of time to allow local people get used to these changes that they're not used to. I mean, you can take it to 15, and then once the new system is implemented, once maybe local workers are trained on how this works, once voters are more educated, and the system's running well and everything's great, or as great as possibly can be, then you move it down to 11 or to 10. But I think given all of the, I don't want to call it chaos, but given the fluidity of the system right now, more time rather than less.
The applying for the mail-in ballot and voter registration, the same 15 days. Is going to create an issue for the counties, because you're going to get flooded with both applications at the same time. The mail-in ballot isn't due till midnight. I mean, the voter registration isn't due till midnight. The mail-in ballot is due at 5 o'clock. So right there, you're creating confusion. So those 2 days. And plus, you're gonna get counties like Philadelphia, where I could get, somebody could drop off thousands of voter registrations and thousands of mail-in ballots right at the deadline.
So what about something like 15 days for voter reg and 12 days for mail? Something that, you know, it's kind of gives the counties enough time. It's extending the timeline, which they've done since 2020. They've been doing it 7 days. So giving them an extra 5 is giving them something. And we're keeping the voter registration deadline at a different date than that mailing deadline.
How are those 2 days
Yeah.
together?
Well, now we're talking about registration. Yeah, so I mean, it was my perspective that the counties wanted to move both of the states back. Voter registration definitely, and the mail-in ballot 15. So because they were administering the election, I would like.
I can tell you that that was one of the things that we were advocating for at one point in time. Lisa, I don't remember. It's probably a year ago at least that we talked about that at our election reform committee. But it was after 77 was passed and we went through an election or two.
Right.
But the thought was that if we moved the registration deadline back to 30 and the mail-in application to 15, we would solve all of the problems that we've discussed here so far today.
Right.
Not knowing that.
So that gives you 2 weeks in between the two deadlines.
Right.
And what Christina is suggesting is 3 or 4 days.
We would also solve the whole problem by just moving the days apart from 15 to 12 or 15 to 11. Moving the voter registration deadline back to 30 days. I wouldn't want to see that happen, because that 2 weeks allows people, many more people the opportunity to partake in the process.
And also, question is, so I know when Act 77 first passed, there was a big, like, do you feel that the county, aside from the deadline of mail-in balloting, do you feel like the county has caught up with the registration deadline, that they're comfortable with it now, that they've gotten used to it? It's been 2 years that these numbers are in place, so are they still seeing the same kind of issues that they were originally, or have they acclimated and moved their schedules around so that now they are familiar with the 15-day registration deadline, and are they more acclimated with that?
Oh, I mean, we're definitely acclimated to it.
Okay.
It's, the crunch is still, again, it's a small office we have, and I know there's a lot of times like this, but it's just making sure that we're getting everyone in and then processing and doing live in-person voting and getting ready for the law. It's just a lot in 2 weeks' time. That's just a.
Do you think that that is something that isn't so much a change in your county, but it's just an overall change with Act 77, because Act 77 essentially invites 2 different election systems now, so it's more work for all vote, like all election offices across the county, across all 67 counties have greater needs there. So I don't know if is it a benefit to pull these deadlines back, or to say, oh wait, look, now we need to supply more money and more time and more staff to our elections departments in these counties. Like it seems like there's a, like we have to kind of hit a happy medium between the 2 of those.
Yeah, I mean, most counties that I've talked to, we've all done that. We've all put extra staff. I mean, we're pulling staff members from other offices that knew nothing about elections today are probably more well versed in elections than a lot of elections, new elections directors, because we've had such a turnover. And I think that's proof. I mean, the proof is there that the reason we've had such a turnover in our elections directors positions is mainly because of the extra, and I don't like to use this term very often, but the extra stress that we put on those people in a short amount of time is almost unbearable for some.
And is it a stress, but stress without, like, if the state and the budgets would offer support, then that stress would be more easily managed, or?
I don't think that the support has anything to do with it, only because, you know, our folks get it done.
Okay.
I mean, I've got people that are putting in 16, 18-hour days, and they don't leave until everything they need to get done that day is done. And they're building up months of comp time, you know, to prove it. But I mean, they're dedicated and they get it done. And I wouldn't say that it's a lack of support from the state. It's just an influx of work demand in a very short window.
Yeah, and because it's such an intense period, you can't staff up for a full year just for those things. And we're having problems getting temporary workers now to come in, bringing temporary workers. We're having problems bringing them in. And I have concerns about using temporary workers because they have to be trained in such a finite period of time that, yes, certainly we would take more resources, but it's that period of time. So it's no matter what you do in those final 30 days for the election, that's what it is. And I don't know how much you can throw at that.
What's really scary is if you look at, you know, a cross section of Pennsylvania or maybe America today with the job market, if you took the percentage of people that are leaving their jobs to go to better opportunities and extrapolate that across all of our elections offices, we got a lot of challenges. I'm not just talking directors, I'm talking across the board, poll workers, everybody. We got a lot to be concerned about.
To the underlying point of support. The support is being offered by counties already. It's just the first one through content.
Well, it depends on the counties. Not all counties do things.
Right. But as you pointed out, those people are building on content. That costs money. And what I would say from the state perspective is, we'll give you all the time in the world, but don't come to us and money. I mean, that's kind of it's easy for us to do time. It's not easy for us to do. Well, it is for some things. But very great. It's easier for us to give you more time than more money. But
Yvonne, you and the chairman are looking for a consensus, and so it's much of an appreciate the opportunity to be quiet for the rest of the day. I want to offer my thanks to the county commissioners that are here and that have that practical insight. And so for that reason, all the reasons of the happenings of so many things in that one period of time, I think that is practical, and I would side on 14 to 15 days. It was probably good for me to achieve that.
Yeah, because I'm trying to formulate in my brain how we want to talk about this. And I think on the lower hanging fruit, as long as the mail-in ballot date is after the voter registration date, that combined application is not going to mess with the mail-in ballots, whatever that ends up being, because you just put the two together and the mail-in ballot came earlier along with the voter registration. So you haven't done anything to disrupt anything if the mail-in ballot deadline remains less than the registration deadline. And we do intend to have further discussion on voter registration in its many forms in the future. One of the advantages of this being a recurring body, we can do this until, you know, we start pushing my wheelchair in here. So, or I'll just say that's it. I'm done. Somebody else do it. So anyway, point being, I think the voter, what I'm hearing is the voter registration is probably something we want to talk about, but we don't need to decide it today. That we're trying to focus on what can we do to deal with the mail-in ballots in an appropriate way. And so what I'm also hearing from most people is somewhere in that 11 to 15 day range would be acceptable. I guess other than, because again, if you do the dual application and they're both on the 15th day, it'll figure it out. It's not that you're not going to have your mail-in ballot rejected because your voter registration took a couple of days to be cleared up. So I'm not sure why that couple of days difference between 15 and 12 would make much of a difference. So that's where I'm trying to come in. I think what we could easily do, and I think what everybody at this table would agree, is to move the mail-in ballot application deadline back into somewhere in that window of 12 to 15. But I mean, we could write 12 to 15 days and let each county decide, but I think that's a little confusing for people. So I so at this point, I think what I need to hear from you guys is pick a number and stick with it, and we'll write it. So,
Look, there's no harm in reporting to the General Assembly that the advisory board thinks something. You can put both those numbers in that. We just don't want to write that range. We don't want to put ranges.
statutes. Yeah. I'm sure that's legal to put ranges.
But to Russ's point, the legislature is going to pick a number, whatever they compromise on between both. That's right.
And we can give them a range. Okay, so how?
The significant difference between 15 and 12 and one, go with it, does allow the opportunity for the election staff those 3 extra days to address the other numerous issues that they are already dealing with. I'm guessing that most people in this room have spent time in an elections office, watching what they do during the entire year. Of course, the commissioners see it quite frequently, but I would offer spend a day or so, spend a half a day, 2 weeks before the election, see what's going on, how intense it is, and how time consuming it is, how many balls they're juggling in the air at that point in time. I think any opportunity you can give them a little bit of breathing room, I think would be helpful. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the staff people. I realize we have to take into account the needs of the voters as well, but from the standpoint of the election staff, I think the more breathing room you can give them, the better.
Well, I think we could write a recommendation that said in that range of 12 to 15 days, and here are some considerations you should think about when you're looking at that, like the extra duties that might be accomplished in that time period. So I feel confident we can write that. So this is how we do consensus. Is everybody okay with us trying to make a recommendation like that? That 12 to 15 days for the mail-in ballots with some reasons why that spread was chosen, which all of you would get to look at and say yay or nay before we submitted it.
Part of that reason, I want to make sure, to Lisa's point, that we do mention, so everybody's aware, that's, considering that as they vote on it, or negotiate it, that we do have that lapse, whatever it is, 2 days between deadline application so that that can be processed, so that no one's, again, up against that 12 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Well, too late, you can't, you know, we don't want to have that happen.
This is why we're also recording this, so I can go back and, because you see the notes I take. And so I always go back and rewatch and really pull out language that I think accurately represents what we're doing. So, and like I said, everybody will have another opportunity to look at what we pulled together as the recommendations and have a yay or nay kind of thing. So I'm seeing people nodding, I'm seeing people smiling, I don't see anybody throwing spitballs at me. So I think we're gonna move with that and try to draft something that we think would be useful to the General Assembly. Now we get to come to the really ugly ones.
We didn't really talk much about that early.
Yeah, I know. I have a lot of issues with that, but
Well, I think that's worth a conversation.
well,
Because although that went on with absentee votes in the past, I mean, there was such a small segment of voters who actually did that. But now that is putting a real burden on the counties, and maybe, you know, you can elaborate on, I mean, what is the burden of? I'm thinking, well, somebody's just coming in to pick up a mail ballot. What's the human interaction that has to happen? And then what do? Do they like go outside the office, fill it out, and then bring it back in and hand it to somebody? I mean, so it's human capital, right?
It's human and it's a physical capital issue as well, space. You know, we just renovated the building and moved our elections. We had great foresight. No, that's not what it was. We fortunately made the biggest office in the new building our elections director's office by happenstance. It worked out great, but we still have no place to put people when they come in to register. They go to the window, they get their mail-in ballot, and they want to vote in person. We've got to find a place for them. Now, fortunately, we've got 2 little offices. Close the door and they can vote in private and do all of that. But I've already got one of those offices filled up with a new person coming in next year or something. It's a space issue more than anything for us. But the human capital is, you know, I've got my voter registrar who's helping that voter, and there may be a line of folks certain times of the, you know, weeks of the year. So now it's okay, I'm helping them, and I'm dealing with the phone call that just came in asking what the deadline is to register to vote and do this and do that.
it's so your issue is with providing the voter with privacy. When there's a long line of voters waiting, that's the issue.
Since Act 77, that's been an issue for us, where we physically have a line of people waiting to vote. Right?
and are they then taking their document and scanning next to the counter and filling it in?
No, we
Do you
we
do the-
enforced ourselves to find a place. No, we don't have a place to put those in.
Yeah.
Our hallways are not, you know, they're code, but that's
Because I'm
it.
looking at this room and yeah, you could have half a dozen people voting in here with the cardboard screens.
But does the law require you to provide privacy for those voters?
I don't
think
Does the law require us to provide?
Yeah, because it's the person voting, it's the person, but it's one of the we discussed why. Is that now a polling place? You know, the law doesn't require you to provide that privacy. You could just tell them, well, I'll fill it out and bring it back. If you want. Here's the little inbox that you can put it in, you know, because we're busy. Sorry.
Well,
We're busy.
that's the other
We're
thing. Everything gets handed to them like that.
Exactly.
There's nothing dropped in.
Yeah.
And then same as if, even though they were just there to get their application, same questions you're asked if you bring it in and you get it mailed to your house, you can bring it back to the court. Is this your ballot?
Right.
Mr. or Mrs. Voter?
Right.
Yes, it is. Okay, then I can accept it.
But other counties are just putting a box outside that people could take that ballot, fill it out as they're walking down the courthouse hall, and drop it in the drop box outside the courthouse. So I mean, what are you obligated to do? What do you have to do? I understand your desire to give that voter privacy, but
It's not.
it's problematic.
It's not a statutory sanctioned method of voting.
Right.
So there are no security provisions, there are no privacy provisions. There are very few provisions governing it at all, other than your basic mail-in ballot. How do you fill out the ballot? How do you secure the ballot? How do you return the ballot? But all of what you do with that ballot from the time it leaves the employee's hands until you turn it back is wide open. So you are really circumventing that whole privacy, secrecy requirement of the Constitution, because you've done nothing active to protect that ballot other than having them sign the secrecy on board. But you can stand there.
You don't sign this.
Well, whatever one you sign.
That's another issue.
Oh, yeah.
Something next.
You can stand there next to your husband and he's like, oh no, you don't want to vote for him, you want to vote for him. That's not how we vote, but that can happen when you have people, 2 people, 4 people, dad and his 18-year-old teenagers, and have a let's vote as a family little gathering. And yes, you can do that at home as well when you get, but there's something that just seems not right about doing that in the place where the election law is supposed to be enforced.
You're also waiving all the other things that we do in politics, which allow poll watching from, parties, candidates, that sort of thing. But to be clear, you as a voter are free to waive every right that you're offered under the Constitution in order to get to that. Just like you're free to waive any other rights. So, but I mean, I'm on the side with you. I'm just saying, is there a way we can simply eliminate that? I'm not sure that there is. Because you can't tell someone, well, after you pick up your mail-in ballot in person, you have to leave the courthouse. I don't know how you would do that.
Yeah, I think that.
Unless you just don't offer them. But I think that would be problematic as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to start to regulate what folks would do with that ballot packet, after they receive it or the counter, we'd have to start regulating what they do at home, or like, or else they.
Exactly.
Thank you, though, because you made me not beat myself up now when I have no room to put down.
I mean, because they want the convenience, should not burden the county and the other taxpayers that are paying for that space to provide you with all these little privacy booths, or telephone booths or what have you, for activity that happens only 2 times a year.
So why are we talking about?
Because in the time of the ballot, the early voting method was specifically mentioned at ordinance of the counties. And I thought it was important that we.
So having
focus on that. Yeah.
Deadline move should help that crowding during that last week leading up to the election, so that we can push that back. He will still have the crowds and they'll still be lining up, but it may be at a time where it's not as much of an inconvenience as he's gearing up for the other things. Okay.
And well, this isn't get brought up for discussion anyway, but I was gonna say, if we were to bring up, creating 2 mail-in deadlines, one remote and one over the counter, which a few states have. I'm sure the county would not want to have to talk about that at all, right? I think that would create confusion and long line.
Now we're doing violence.
I think you know what we're gonna do. So let's move on to,
I'm sorry, what we're gonna do is what?
with the mail-in ballot deadline. how you were talking about. No,
Yeah.
no.
It's a smaller piece of that topic than I thought.
Well, I think it's important that we can use that as part of the justification on why we're recommending this move, because it will level out the burden for the county, so they don't have everything in one compressed time frame.
And to that end, I would just like to one more mention, having 15 days and 15 days is available. Those things, 15 days, there, 14, 11, 14, 12, 15, the 15 and the 15, in my opinion.
We'll make it pretty that everybody likes it.
You can make it 14 days by just changing the language, statutory language from the first Tuesday to second Tuesday. That'll make it 14 days. And it only requires one word to change the statute.
Yeah, but we're gonna present them with the range.
Yeah.
So LRB can do that word
Okay.
change when it gets to them, assuming it gets to them. But yeah, so no, we got it.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. Use of secrecy envelopes. And whether or not they're necessary.
I'll go first. I think that they should be provided but not required. And I think that if there is a scribble on it or something on it, it should not invalidate something. I'll send it out.
No, and I'll echo it. So I would have said I agree with that 100% up until 2 weeks ago. But then an issue was brought to my attention by a voter, I shared with Pat earlier, that made me realize the flaw in that process. I agree that if someone forgets to put it in a secrecy envelope, which still counts, it's their right to care whether it's secret or not. They share how they voted is their right or not. The problem, however, with that is this, and I'm going to throw up another issue to get to why this is a problem. A constituent came to me and said, my son was a military, we sent him the absentee ballot, but it never got back to our office. And I said, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't help it if the mail didn't deliver it. And she explained further, and I was not aware of this, shame on me, that our return envelopes with the scanning code have an R or a D in the primary. So if you have someone theoretically who's got evil intentions at the post office, I'm going to throw out all the D ballots that come back, or I'm going to throw out all the R ballots. They can tell whether it's an R or a D ballot being returned because of that code. In this day and age, I find it hard to believe that we can't take that scan code that we bank in with our bankers at the county office. Whether the R or D there makes no difference in the world to our staff. We don't care. We're looking at whether that's a registered voter's ballot coming back. Doesn't matter what party they are. So that's made me realize that if I can see through that envelope because they didn't use the secrecy envelope, and they see Joe Kansas mark, and I don't want him to get another vote, somebody can have nefarious methods of chucking that vote. That would be my only concern. Outside of that, I agree.
That's
But I never thought about that until this.
This is on the outer return envelope, there's like a BR next to part.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a reason why.
I can show you a picture. I actually texted my elections director because I had not seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that's such.
It's only in primary, right?
Only in primary, yeah.
Primary.
Yeah.
And it was my impression that it was always there, to let the county easily decide which primary election that ballot would count. Or is that not necessary now?
I mean,
With the way-
R and D machine.
No.
So why-
Tested to make sure that, basically it's to ensure that, because we're close finals. So Democratic voters must get a Democratic ballot, Republican voters must get a Republican ballot. Maybe this is a good excuse to say, hey, open primaries. And let's eliminate that, open primaries and rid secrecy envelopes.
let's be clear, the R and the D is on the outside of.
I don't think there are any things on the outside.
Don't know. Oh, it's, here's your scan, right here is your D or R. I have no idea. This is, like I said, it's all new to me. Just learned about it too. That's what
So
I'm
there's
The
the,
D is on all the way to the right.
okay, so is that also, oh, that's on the outer side?
It's on the outside of the
Outside of the back of the envelope. Near the signature of the front.
And so this is a question I have to ask my elections director, but, you know, my understanding is we've always been given that from, you know, to the printer from the Department of State. Maybe that's not correct. I don't know.
Maybe you should move, maybe that's.
Untouchable, I don't.
I had never heard of it.
I've never explored it.
Maybe that's something that we can eliminate
Yeah.
from a short perspective and then just get rid of, make it so that it's not an issue.
I just always view that, and when voters have complained to me about that as well, and I've always told them, it's similar to when you're doing your tax return. If you're getting a rebate, you send it to one post office box. If you send it to, you know, if you're getting a refund, you're sending it to a different post office. I thought it was for that purpose, so that when it comes in your door, you can segregate, okay, we've got all the Republicans over here, we've got all the Democrats over here. No.
No.
It
No,
gets
they're all,
scanned,
it's
and then-
that you're only dividing them, you're counting the ballots, you're only dividing them by precinct. So, you know, here's all Union Township, here's all Jackson Township, here's all.
So when do they get segregated as to here are the Republicans in this precinct and here are the Democrats in that precinct?
The machines can
The machines can count both.
count both at the same time.
They want to oversee.
Okay.
That's right. But then the other problem is you can see through the thin outer envelope.
That's the concern that I agree with Christina, I think.
Is that like a standard of using cheap paper? And maybe even the brighter be the kids, you know, I wouldn't want to legislate the kind of paper.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't think you would want the department to regulate what kind of paper you can use.
That has been done multiple times. In the past, your notices have to be of a certain weight, and certain size.
I get it.
It has been done,
The technology changes, so does the physical,
yeah,
Yeah. I think everybody knows my position on the secrecy envelope, right? So, but I would just add that if the voter doesn't use the secrecy envelope, that is their choice. They get all the everything mailed to them and they decide not to use it. They chose they didn't use it. Their vote should not be voided. They did all the steps. They applied, they were found eligible, they got a ballot, they voted on it, they sent it back. That ballot should not be discarded or just because they didn't put that ballot in the secrecy envelope. If a voter's worried about somebody seeing their ballot, they should use the secrecy envelope. If they're not concerned about it, then don't use the secrecy envelope. In either way, a secrecy envelope should not be the determining factor of whether or not we can count an otherwise perfectly eligible vote.
what if a voter feels completely opposite and says that secrecy ballot is not enough? I want to put a third envelope in there. How would that ballot be handled?
It wouldn't count. Unless it was in the secrecy envelope.
No,
Right,
put
yeah.
secrecy envelope in another envelope and then inside the mailing. I'm saying that voter,
put it in the middle.
that, yeah. Exactly. I mean, if you're allowing the voter to send back a ballot in a method that is not the standard. In any fashion, whether it's less than the standard or more than the standard, you're creating a problem of uniformity. And for our purposes, I think our goal should be uniformity. What's going to be best for everyone? I certainly understand your argument about secrecy envelope and that yeah, that seems like a pretty technical thing Especially when you are able to waive your rights anytime you want. But you're gonna have people going the other way too. So what are you gonna do about those ballots that then come in 3 nested
We
envelopes?
haven't had that
And,
problem.
well,
I have never seen that problem. We did have a.
well, I just said it in a public meeting, so I hope nobody.
In the ballot envelope, it is the actual ballot envelope, and then in counties that are using large machinery to open those envelopes, you don't want it sealed with more than what has been tested to ensure that it can be opened.
The envelopes are so tight, you can never fit another envelope. Because it's difficult to get the secrecy envelope inside the mailing envelope.
Is that a standard that's handed down by the Department of State and is uniform across all counties?
You get the envelope design from the state.
And the statute actually describes the process of putting one envelope in the other envelope. So it doesn't include a process of a third envelope.
Yeah.
So if you had a third envelope, you wouldn't be following it. It wouldn't be a statutorily compliant ballot, which is, I believe, what Ms. Steele was.
Well, just to be speaking, I can fold my ballot more times. And
Yeah.
put another envelope on the inside. Yeah. Don't say that out loud.
I can't imagine that statute. I mean, I guess this is something we should offer this state on it. If none of us can think of a reason why operationally, or for any other reason, I could be part of the relationship we have now on it. I mean, that should be, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. On the secrecy.
We're one of only 16 states that use.
But to the extent I think those are separate, and I can't think of a reason why part of the relationship on the outer envelope.
It's on the label, I guess it's on the label, they print the
It is, yeah,
label.
but,
So I guess that's something we could look at and be sure that,
The secrecy envelope itself, whether or not, it has to be required, I think, needs some more conversation, because I think I've seen different views on it.
I think the problem to an extent is might solve itself through the courts. The Third Circuit recently said that you're going to throw out a letter with federal law, then you have to show that it was the requirement was due to age, citizenship, residency, or an imprisonment for a felon. Okay, I don't know where the secrecy envelope goes to any of those things, which means that the feds are going to say you can't require this. The Pennsylvania Constitution has a secrecy requirement, but the Supreme Court has never, to my knowledge, issued any cases on that, said what that secrecy means. And I think when you look at some of the other things that we put forth in the document that staff provided, secrecy could mean we can't require you to tell everybody who you voted for. But practically, as we're scanning more of these ballots, and people are reading them, not reading them through that high-speed scanning process, I don't know where the secrecy envelope actually matters for secrecy, given just the practicalities of the way these things are done. So although I think this is a good conversation, I think we should have it. I haven't seen sufficient the courts are going to deal with the secrecy envelope, because there does seem to be a very political angle, as in one side of the equation, if you don't have secrecy envelope, it gets thrown out. Other side of the political equation, secrecy envelopes have nothing to do with it. That spells lawsuit. I think there's some water that has been thrown out there that is going to feed this litigation. So I like this conversation, but I just think that maybe the end result comes from the court to say how this is going to play out. And I'm not saying we should move on to something else, but I always like to spend my time talking about things I don't think judges are going to jump into.
I have to wonder why the envelope, you're mailing it back in to, why is that not secrecy? The ballot is tucked inside a sealed envelope. To my mind, that makes it secret to start out with.
as somebody who's been doing this a really long time, the reason why we looked for the secrecy envelope years ago was because we used to mail the absentee ballots used to go to the polling
Right.
certification. So years ago, I would be a judge of election, I would get the absentee ballots delivered to the polls, I would indicate in the book, the voter voted absentee, and then all those ballots would get put in a bigger envelope and shaken up in the secrecy envelope, so you couldn't, so I, Lisa Zealy, the judge of elections in that division, wouldn't know that this was a Bruce's ballot. So, but we are so far past that, that is no longer how we count them, and they come back in such large numbers. And in most counties, if not all counties now, they're done by machine, so there's no way anybody would know whose ballot actually belonged to what individual. But back in the day, absolutely, that was how you protected people's anonymity.
Well, that's only been a few years, right, since that shift was made. All right, what if we said that we don't see a justifiable reason to require secrecy envelopes, that we believe with the litigation you're talking about, and we reference that case, that they're going to go the way of the dodo, and we would not fight that.
Well, I didn't speak to that,
Okay.
because in every one of these issues that we're talking about today, there's a balancing that's going on. And on the one hand, I'm very thankful for each of the county commissioners who are here, who tell us what a burden this is and that. And Ms. Dealey, I've heard you say repeatedly that the secrecy envelope is administratively an enormous pain in the backside on your own. And I've heard that. And I don't disagree with that, particularly in light of the fact that I'm not in your office or any election office on election day or the 2 weeks leading up to election day. So I can't speak to it, so I'll assume that that's true.
Well, you can just assume that it's a whole nother step, it's a whole nother honor.
And and so that's another reason beyond my belief that you're a credible person, to believe that to be true. On the other hand, I think that it's good for us and the legislature to understand the purpose of having the secrecy envelope. And I think it's akin to or aligned with the idea that we've got these curtains when you walk in. And if you have the situation that comes to my mind over and over again is that abused spouse or that pressured spouse who would not feel free to make an independent decision about who to vote for in that person's home, but for the opportunity to do it behind a closed curtain. And so that if I have, or I won't use myself as an example, but if you have a voter who is fearful of voting his or her mind, because if it gets back to the person that I live with, there's going to be hell with it. I think that we should do everything we can, even if it's a little bit of administrative headache, to protect them. I'm not sure that secrecy envelopes are a perfect way to do that, but if it prevents the possibility that someone at the elections services office would be able to identify and connect a person with a vote where it would give back to the spouse or the partner, that would bother me. And so I'm not saying that, again, that the secrecy envelopes protect that perfectly, because you could, speaking candidly, you can have that abusive individual in the home leaking the secrecy envelope for you, right?
It's high enough to be assist the voter at the polling place.
You could, yeah.
So I mean, I don't know, I mean, respectfully, I don't know if the secrecy envelope would the vote.
And I don't want to speak for the Commissioner Dealer, but I heard you say that you're fine with it being there, but that a person should not be disenfranchised if they choose not to.
I mean, ideally, I would like to see it eliminated, but in the spirit of compromise, of course, if we could just not throw out a person's vote.
And I fully support that.
I think that should
not be thrown out.
That should
It comes
not,
off.
that should not disenfranchise someone. That should not disenfranchise. I mean, I believe that the secrecy ballot should be kept as provided to the voter. But again, you're free to waive any rights you like to at any time you like. And if you choose not to use that, that's on you. I mean, for me, the secrecy ballot is the equivalent of the moment you drop your written ballot into the machine. Because now it has become anonymous. You cannot tell your ballot from anyone else's ballot. And think, General Assembly, when we were thinking about access, we were thinking, there's going to be a point in time where this ballot is taken out of outside. But we need to have a way to keep that thing anonymous, to duplicate that anonymity that we get. That way, nobody can see, no ballot is tagged to any one person, which is a different topic here, which we talk about people marketing ballots. So,
But an additional benefit to uniformity is not just efficiency, because it is efficient and to have as much uniform as we can. But I think uniformity also protects that individual voter. To say that it's not my decision to put it in the secrecy vote, I have to put it in the secrecy vote. So I think it gives a defense or an opportunity to point to somebody else as responsible for this decision. I just think it's something to be considered. On the other side of the practical reasons why we may want to get rid of it.
Well, and Lisa mentioned this already, but my reservation in legislation changes would be that there's been a push by a number of people to say that those ballots should be counted at the local polling precincts. I would absolutely be against changing this requirement if it goes back to that, because then you will have a group of 5 people counting a handful of ballots. There could be a handful of ballots, and I guarantee you every one of them will know how certain people vote. That doesn't work for me. But so as long as we're not trying to take it back to the local polling places, I agree with Lisa. When they come back to the county, they're done in such a mass quantity. There is no way I could possibly know how anybody voted, because number one, we're ripping them, the machine's tearing the thing open. They're going on a pile of secrecy envelopes, and if there happens to be a naked ballot, it's going in that pile as well. We don't have time to look at who voted how. It just doesn't happen.
Request that be added to the code so that there's not going to be a point in time where absentee and mail-in ballots go back to these 2 numbers. That they're counted centrally, and the secrecy ballot is, or the secrecy envelope is no longer required. They actually add that in and make that stipulation, so it's all in one, so it's more inclusive. Again, I think that might cover a little bit more, just those concerns coming down the road where we see people trying to count the number of races after a long day or having to find. Like bringing that back, like I know, I was a voter election for a long time, and we had a few mail-in ballots, and a few is one thing, but that's what it's out to date. But the number of mail-in ballots now would essentially keep those poll workers there from 9 o'clock on state, close polls, close machines, do their tallies, do that. They'd be there until 1:30.
At least.
Yeah, at least.
No, I forget this. Are the absentee ballots still going out to the polls?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
No.
So that none of that's happening now.
Yeah, so, but perhaps that should be added to the code, so that it's not, yes, to prevent it from happening again. So that if there are counties that want to change that, the legislature has pretty much said, look, we're getting rid of secrecy ballots, but by getting rid of secrecy ballots, this means the count on these ballots has to happen.
I thought that was in one of the latest set of amendments, but we'll go back and look at that. To verify that counts go to county, mail-ins and absentees are going to count and not being counted at the precinct.
So I have another question about secrecy envelopes. Was the intent of this discussion to come up with consensus about doing away with secrecy envelopes or counting naked ballots?
whichever way you guys want to
Because
go.
I was kind of leaning on the naked ballot side, because that's a real issue that, you know, we've had to deal with, and
Yeah, now it's really both, whatever direction you would want to go with.
I mean, I see where, you know, one is more administrative, like, we don't want to have to do that, or one is, okay, if they don't use it, we don't want to disenfranchise that vote, it should count.
Mhm.
That's kind of where I was at, but there's two different paths to take there.
I think the word, to your point, that is definitely naked ballots should be counted, they should not disenfranchise people. And if that, however, I mean, again, it doesn't rid any administrative tasks from a county perspective, but it gets the job done. So,
We shouldn't penalize the voter for waiting that way, but we should obligate the Commonwealth, who the counties to actually support the provider.
Well, I think that we can write that it says the secrecy ballot is provided. And if it's not used, it's a harmless error or whatever, and that those ballots, those naked ballots should be counted whether or not they come back with a secrecy. And we can write that in better language than I can pull off the top of my head, but we can write that very artfully.
I will say that one of the drawbacks. I agree with what you're saying, that should never disenfranchise. But the drawbacks of putting that in statute is that just like this new dual registration and mail-in voter thing, at some point, somebody at the Department of State or elsewhere will say, we recommend voters don't use the secrecy. And now it's guidance, now it is viewed as a directive. And now we're thwarting the intention of our whole process, which is simply to protect that voter who neglected to use the secrecy. We get into that. Unfortunately, I never saw statutory law like this before I came into the legislature. And most especially Act 77, where I now have to poke holes 18 steps down the road in the statutory language of the rights. And even in the advice this board is now giving me. So
I would just.
see, that's the only drawback.
I would just say that just gives credence to just eliminate the secrecy envelope. Just eliminate, because we already know that it is not, we all agree that it should not invalidate a vote. We already know that having another envelope, if you have another step in anything, whether it's cooking, cleaning, painting, you're adding another step, you're adding more time, more money, it's taking longer, whole nother step. So we already know it costs more money, it's another piece of envelope that we have to get printed, that we have to mail out. So if we just eliminate it, then we don't have to worry about any of these issues. We are doing mail-in balloting at such high numbers, and they're coming back and they're being handled by machine. A person's identity is that in no way, any time at risk of being revealed. I really just think that we should just eliminate the secrecy envelope. Then we don't have to play, jujitsu with the code and what counts and what doesn't count. Just eliminate it. It's the simplest, most direct way to get to the end, which could very well be that the court says you shouldn't have it anyway, because it's restricting a voter.
But our job should be to go to every effort to protect that right to the secret ballot. And even though I understand everything's being done fast, it's being done sensitively now, it does not stop the rogue person from saying, I'm grabbing a bunch of ballots, I'm gonna find out who voted. And that the obligation is to protect the voters. Not to encourage the voter to waive it in any way our job is to protect that voter's right. Voter wins, that's a different story. But to protect it along every step of the way, no matter how burdensome it is, our biggest job is to protect people's rights. And they do have a right to a secret ballot, according to the Constitution.
I'll go back to my original point. I understand this point, but I could not support getting rid of it completely unless we address the other issue that I brought up. I can pull 500 ballots and I can tell you which ones are naked ballots or not, because I can see through the envelope, whether it's in the secrecy envelope or not. I mean, as we're processed thousands of ballots, oh, there's a naked ballot and now put that one aside. We've got to figure out what to do with that. You can tell. I can see how that person voted. If they use a good black or blue ink pen, you can tell how they voted if you want to take the time to do that through the envelope. That's a problem.
You, the postal carrier,
Right.
and anybody who touches that.
Exactly.
Is going to hurt his or her mailbox. You're wrong.
If they've got nefarious purposes in intent, they can make
Right.
that ballot go away before we
Our
don't
job in protecting that right is to eliminate any potential opportunity to violate.
So again,
Yes.
you know, do we regulate what thickness of paper? If we're gonna get rid of the secrecy envelope, we darn well better.
Or have a process on the inside.
Again, whatever we do is getting rid of the secrecy envelope ever happens, we darn well better protect that envelope on the outside, or people's ballots are gonna go disappearing. And get rid of the R&D on the outside.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with my preferred position, which would be what you said, would be to do away with it, so it's envelope altogether, but paper stock, color, whatever that have to be done, I mean, I don't know, text, it makes you can't see through, but I mean, it does seem like we're gonna wind up the compromise petition, which that, yeah, the secrecy envelopes will still go out without tax. If the ballot comes back without one, so now it sounds like that's the compromise.
And we can find language that talks about, not necessarily, we can go in either way with it. We don't necessarily talk about, you can talk about that it has to be, you know, so many pounds rag content or whatever. And we can just, and again, probably set up some room for some litigation, but use the, some way of describing it so that it can't be seen through. And I think there's language out there in some of our statutes that address that as well. I think we just need to do a little digging on, because some things you have to put the language in the statute to make sure you get compliance. That's like, especially like home mortgages, credit cards, the kind of notifications you have to put on real estate documents, they have to be a certain point size and even font choices so that they are visible and that people understand them. So I think we can come up with something.
There's font sizes in this act right here. It's there.
So that we can come up with a way to make those outer envelopes not transparent. Without doing a really.
Yvonne, just real quick, one thing that we discussed in the work group as a compromise would be to still require the secrecy envelope, but if there were any naked ballots, it would be set aside as provisional ballots. So I don't know if anybody's good with that idea. I just thought I'd throw that.
Well, I think that.
Now, provisional ballots are not fun. And we try to avoid provisional ballots, at least with the judges I know, provisional ballots are the last thing you want. But no, we just, you know, count the envelope. No, okay, they waive their right to security, count it.
There is another, just to be clear, there's another envelope return that we didn't discuss yet. That's the opposite of the naked ballot. That's the secrecy envelope that someone wrote their name on, which I will tell you flat out, we counted. Because it's already separated. We don't know we didn't know whose it was at the beginning.
Right, you can
We don't know if they wrote
rewrite
their own. So we can.
An individual voter violate or waiving their own rights, I don't think that voter should ever be. They shouldn't be disenfranchised for waiving their rights.
Well, I think that leads us to a related issue that we probably should talk about right now. Who cares if I doodle on any of the envelopes? I doodle on the ballot, yeah, I can understand why that should not be allowed, should not have marks all over the ballot. But if you drew a flower on the corner of your secrecy envelope because you're a doodler, so what? I mean, I don't see a justification for any of the rules that say you can't put any marks on the envelopes. Because they're not doing anything about, I mean, you could stamp whatever, whatever, let's go Joe or whatever, you can stamp that on your envelope, you know, stamp Trump is God. It doesn't matter. Nobody who's going to be voting and opening that is going to be seeing that. And if it's on the envelope, you throw the damn envelope away anyway. So what does it matter what is on those outside envelopes?
And plus, we've all gotten currency where people have written all kinds of crazy things.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not allowed to legally, it's illegal.
Again, that's just, yeah, to me, that's the same thing. If a voter wants to waive their rights, I don't think it's the same thing. I mean, I don't know mechanically. Does doodling on an envelope of any sort interfere with the process?
Is there anything in the legislative record, committee notes, anything that would give a reason for that rule?
The county or something, it's like, the people weren't supposed to be able to like write, inflammatory remarks on things that the people would have to open up and talk to. That's where they were thinking like back in the 1930s, but I don't.
Delicate sensitivities.
Yes.
I have a t-shirt that said, I use swear words a lot. So, yeah, I mean, you know, unless it's pornography on the outside of the envelope, bad words, I don't care. Did that do anything? I did not subject anybody to anything.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate, even if there is pornography on the envelope, do not disenfranchise the voter. Let the voter vote, that's their choice, right?
Is any human being seeing it?
There might be counties that are so small that they don't have.
You're still putting all the envelopes in stack.
Right, but the person would then be exposed to that pornography or that language or those things that they might find in college.
I mean, anybody working with envelopes could be.
It's good.
Well, then I think
Don't draw attention to it.
We're gonna have people drawing
Doing it.
really odd things on
Yeah.
their secrecy ballots in the next couple of years.
You said that in a public meeting.
Yeah,
You're encouraged.
Well, we should have an art contest.
oh, and the winner gets extra votes.
This is where in Montgomery County is.
Won't even get bragging rights because it'll be a secrecy.
So now, are you saying that your office does not have any
Understanding beyond the profanity possibility.
Or
that COVID.
Pristine. I think the idea, I mean, we'll look at it and see if we can find any kind of justification for it. But with a statute as old as the 37 Act is, there's not going to be much legislative history outside of what's actually in the statute. So, or maybe the statute that it was drawn from, because when you go really back to 19th century statutes, a lot of times they will tell you their life story as part of the statutes, title and declarations. And then you can get some information about what they were looking at. But generally, there's probably not going to be much outside the actual parameters of the statute. But we'll go look and we'll see. But I really, other than I would think to just make sure it was clean. That would be the reason, but we'll look.
Other reason not to do it, because if you did do it on the outside and you use the thick pen and it goes through your ballot is fine.
Yeah, and at that point, that's on you.
That's right.
You know.
And
you
at that
don't-
point, once it's out the outside, well, we don't use this anyway, so it's gonna get fought, but you don't know.
Yeah.
No hearing methods.
Yeah.
All right, Grant and Steve, you can do that, or who wants to look that up? Toss a coin or something. Yeah. But yeah, no, so that's good. Now let's talk about dating the ballot. Because the outside envelope is where you're supposed to sign and date, correct? Yes. So, we talked about dating the ballots in one of the work groups, two of the work groups. Before, one of the things that was raised with that is that people don't always understand what date is being looked for, that they will put their birthday, that, you know, they will put election day, because that's the date it's being counted versus the day they're actually casting the ballot. So, so the question is, what purpose is served by dating the ballot? Because as one person pointed out, if you have it at the county and it's before 8 o'clock on election day, then who cares what date is on it? It's been received. So where do we come down about requiring the date on? And as I guess as a secondary issue, even the signature, I mean, yes, signing it, I don't think is a burden for anybody, unless you're under 20, they didn't teach you cursive in elementary school. But signing the ballot and dating it, and I think dating is the bigger issue. I don't know that the signature has been a problem for many people or caused any problems, but the date has. So what do you think?
Does the code or legislation specifically say date with the date you are putting it in the envelope?
No,
Or does it just say date?
just says date.
So there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right,
And
so
then
then you
what
have to put
purpose
their
does that-
birthday or election day. and
I mean, the easiest way to fix that is have the space on the envelope, say date of signing.
Yes, you can do that. I mean, I think it really comes down to, you can say, you can specify more clearly in the statute what date we want it dated, or we can say, we don't need to date it at all, because as long as it gets to county in time, the assumption is it was
For those,
executed prior to election day.
for those people who vote in person, of which I'm one. My recollection is when you sign in at the polling place, you put your signature in order to vote, you sign that poll book.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
But my recollection also is you don't put the date, you don't date a, you don't sign a date in it.
No, I always vote in person. No, I don't.
So we do require a signature.
The date is assumed.
So that on one day between 8 and 5.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like why we got our ballots back.
Yeah.
And forgive me real quick, my other recollection is that at the election office, and I'll look to my fellow commissioners for verification of this. That when the ballots do come in, I believe the envelope is time stamped, time and date stamped for receipt purposes, am I correct about that? So there is a record of, and as you noted, as long as that record of receipt doesn't go past the official deadline, then it's an acceptable document.
Yeah.
Okay.
agree.
So I guess that's the question. Do we want to say you don't need to date it, or do we want to specify what date it's supposed to be?
You don't need to date it, the third circuit says you don't need. to.
Right.
Why pay, let's go ahead and be
Oh, I
signing.
know, but part of it too is, and Russ, you can confirm or deny that sometimes the General Assembly, especially when they're federal courts, are like, you can't tell us what to do. So.
You're correct.
I don't think there's the that you can work around that by explaining, getting around the materiality provision, or explaining why it's there, or having it more clear on the envelope date of signature would clear that opinion of the third circuit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, that if we added some if we decided to keep it, we could add enough specificity to make it meet that materiality threshold.
So then the intention would be to change it so that the date would be a disqualifying factor.
Yeah.
But then that's kind of a strange, disqualifying factor to have next to eligibility or voter.
I would be interested to find out how that goes to, like you said, age, citizenship, residency, or current imprisonment status.
Or
Maybe imprisonment status, I don't know. Age.
I mean, if the date has nothing to do with the legitimacy that outcome, that's not the way. I can't imagine why that would be requirement. That is, the thing is, the envelopes can still have like the date. And we even specify that this is the date this you sign the application. Yeah, it's not necessary.
I think there's something to be said here from a legislative perspective. A lot of the statutes, we understand that there will be people who violate statutes. Clearly, there are. But a lot of the emphasis on us passing the statute is that a good citizen will abide by the statute simply because it's the statute. And I think it goes back to, and I'm presuming this applied to absentee ballots since 1937, and that's signing and dating, right? Why? Because signing and dating something, it's something you do with official documents. You do it with checks. You do it with affidavits. You do it with any contract you sign, and it gives people the sense of I'm doing something official. So now, is it different that we don't have to sign a date when we show up at voting? No, because we know it. If we went to early voting, true early voting, we may not have changed that. But I think there's something in that sense there, that signing and dating something to every name, to the average guy, feels very efficient. And I think that's why it was originally built into, for the absentee ballots. And there's something to be said for that. So I would side with, it has to say date of signing, rather than just simply saying you don't have to. Because I still want a voter to feel like they're doing something that's important. Because they are.
And the state has an interest in that.
Yes.
Well, from a processing standpoint, just thinking through it. The elections office staff is not going to take the time to look and see what the date was. If somebody happened to have the wrong date, I didn't know what today's date was, and I put down the 28th instead of the 29th today, and the 28th was deadline. As long as it's dated, we're not going to.
There are parallel issues. And it's not about the date, it's about the signature. Because when I go with a vote, my signature looks strangely unlike the signature that's on file. They may question, they may ask me for my ID. And if you're not doing the time with the date, well, are we looking at that signature then? Let's make sure it matches in the book. Because that, I mean, it's not for this, but we're talking about the same thing on a parallel track.
I mean, I'm sure we all are unanimously agree. The signature has to be on there. That's a declaration that the voters make. But I mean, there are hundreds of folks who, the dates aren't going on in the envelopes, and I guess I'm struggling to understand why we're gonna let those hundreds of votes be set off to the side. And to have a day requirement. Again, like the legitimacy of the ballot, come back to the human voter. Why does it matter if that person put the date on there?
But you just underpinned my point. When you said signing the thing is a declaration.
And that's just that should be required.
Anything else you sign, when you're making that kind of declaration. Why is?
Well, you wouldn't have to date it because it's, when we receive it, it's timestamped and dated. We already know that we receive it in a window of time where it is to be counted. So the date is irrelevant to whether or not it's a legitimate vote.
I'm not disagreeing with you as far as administrative. I'm talking more about the question of the mind of the voter when you know what I mean.
So the compromise would be, it says date of signer on it, you ask people to put the date on it, if it comes in, it doesn't have a date, it's still counted in the process. And I think that gives Russ, and I think all of us are saying, there's some good perception reasons why that date can be there. Let's go ahead and put it there, but again, if it's not, doesn't mean it's there.
I might, probably gonna confuse the issue all the more. But if I fill out, sign and date it, for whatever reason, it arrives in your office 3 days after the deadline, what argument do I make of that? I say, look, I signed this well in advance of the deadline, but you folks didn't process it until 3 days after the deadline.
Or more
Where's
likely,
the onus?
or more likely, the postage is lost in the mail.
Yeah.
Not that anyone here is throwing anyone else under the bus. Yeah.
Well, but can the voter hang his or her hat on?
No.
No.
Okay.
No, that's the lie. And that's how it understands.
I'll clarify, I'm not advocating for envelopes that have to strip of the date. I think that's perfectly fine. It's just that a ballot should still be counted if something have to put a date on there.
And if they're signing, they're gonna put the date.
Most
If they see the two spaces, one said signature, one said date and sign. Let them do both, but now let them know which date we're actually looking at. If it says date of signing, you know, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
It's a bit, you know. I mean, clearly, even Pennsylvania courts, not just federal, Pennsylvania courts.
Okay, we'll be
I'm
creating.
not saying you should, I'm saying.
You know, today's date.
Yeah. The birthday, election bills, anniversary.
Or they're signing, these are. The older people that do that, and you think that they would, like you say, they sign, when they sign checks, they put the date when they sign.
Right.
Yet. 40, a high percentage, very high percentage come back and they're looking at it's the name of the voter and then their birth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a definition.
Right, it's a birth, and that's what I would say that probably.
Nobody warned them about credit card fraud.
Yeah, that's just flying to go out in the mail, but that's so I get your point about, you know, when you sign a check, although I would hazard that most younger people probably don't sign, like if you only banked online, you've never signed a dated check, never.
Some of
So,
my kids have.
right, and so we're talking about subsets of society that live under different means, so I think we really need to be able to clarify 2 days date, this is the date you want, rather than, like it.
Okay, we're 85 years removed from that. So.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the footnote on every page.
I'll only have that.
I just figure I'm doing it the way I'm comfortable and the rest of the world can just deal with it. 2 spaces after a period. I don't care, whatever else. 2 spaces.
Well, and you really want to get nicely about it, you may want to also specify a format. One day a year, because not in this military,
Yeah,
and it's reversed.
yeah.
I mean, if we're going to say day aside, you probably have to specify it, but format of the day.
Probably.
I think we almost right now. Don't say it. Right? Where it says-
Well, as an international online shopper, putting dates in, I have to check because European dates are.
Today's date required.
And then the same monthly here.
No.
Wait, it already says
It says today's date required, in parentheses is required.
And did that person put their birthday down?
They actually put the date. Yeah. So it already says today's date. It says
Well, it
today.
says on the form, does it say in the
No, that's
statute?
No, this is, yeah.
On one actually says statute, or that was added by part of the state. Because they like to add a lot of stuff.
Would we be able to include in the report and commentary matters that are not strictly statutory, the partisan note on topic? I don't think that's a status, that's something on. And in this case, I mean, the sentence that is for all this litigation, was elected shall then fill out on a sign and a date declaration. So it's really just pulling out comma space date, it would have gotten in front of all this litigation. So I mean, that's what should come out of statute, but you can also say that it's perfectly reasonable and helpful to have, like, keep the date field on the envelopes, because you know, whether it means something to the voter or it's common of the person signature, but it's like this, that there's 5 paragraphs for this.
Oh, yeah.
Lawsuit. And it would cause ballots to be not counted, which, you know, coming from the voters. So we might be able to distinguish between that, this commentary, one on explaining a little bit of statute, and then one generally on what should be on the return envelope.
We can do anything we want. Sure.
Well, I think.
I love it.
The, no, the more justification we can give, the more, we can help the members of the legislature who are reading the report make up their own minds about what they want to do. We can say there are these concerns, there are these concerns, and
So we could clarify, for example, we don't have a problem with the date field being on the envelope. That's okay. It's just that a ballot that comes in, or someone didn't happen to fill out that particular field, I'm just talking about, as long as it's signed. You know, the signature has to be there.
yeah. I think that's what I'm hearing. Obviously, again, everybody will get a chance to read all the fine print. And we do try to be a lot more selective and careful in our language and the way we phrase things, so that there's really no ambiguity and there's one interpretation of the words chosen. So we are careful.
Patrick, you said a couple times that the signature has to be on the outside of the envelope. Well, what's the value of having a signature on the outside of the envelope? If you have a sworn statement on the inside of the envelope or not, it's.
Oh, that affidavit, that statement is on the outside.
It's always there.
Yeah.
This is your outside declaration. Yeah,
Yep.
voter declaration. You can sign that, date it, that's the outside. of the envelope. On the backside. And then if you had someone helping you, be completed by voter unable to sign the declaration, that would be that.
Good, thank you.
Well, you'd have thought we planned it this way. We are at pretty much at lunchtime. And we are at a good breaking point. I think we are probably going to spend most of the afternoon talking about drop boxes. So that'll be fun. But I think right now, it's close enough to noon, we can take a break. we can, point in the direction of the restrooms and, we'll have, light lunch here. One back. I mean, obviously, you can sit right here and eat your lunch because we don't have anywhere else, but, so, you know, go find what you want. Wendy has a, things set out or whatever. But, yeah, and you certainly don't have to stay with us for the next hour if you've had enough of us. To like walk around the park and get some fresh air. Great.
Top of the ballot, it says you're supposed to check 3 pieces of the ballot, and not, you won't be counted unless you sign the date, vote declaration, obviously, and you seal your ballot inside the yellow super seal.